All right, I think we're in a position to get started now. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are joining us today. Welcome to everyone to this webinar on accelerating action on gender equality. How can streets and public spaces enable safer travel for women? For the next 90 minutes or so, we will be exploring together the persistent problem of how to ensure a safe and secure transport system for all travelers, and in particular, women. This webinar will focus on women's safety in public transport and related public space infrastructure, as well as on active travel modes, for example, walking and cycling, and their interface with the use of collective transport means. The ITF is very grateful to the UK Presidency of the International Transport Forum for co-hosting this session with us. I'd like to acknowledge in particular Nick Bell, who works with both the UK Department for Transport and ITF, along with Magdalena Olszak and Melissa Pedroso of our staff here at ITF, for the collaborative organization of this online gathering today. The session will run as follows. Further to some opening remarks by our Secretary General, Young-tae Kim, and Baroness Fair, the Minister for Aviation, Maritime and Security of the United Kingdom, we'll begin our exploration of the topic with the help of 5 expert panelists, whom I'll be introducing to you very shortly. We'll have then about 45 minutes for you, our participants, to ask questions and exchange with our expert panel. We're delighted to have more than 200 registered for this event today, and we really look forward to your sharing your experiences and insights into questions related to active mobility in women and their safety and security in public transport. You're invited to submit questions and comments using the question and answer button, the Q&A button that you see at the bottom of your screen. We'll collate all the questions that are received and then put these to the panelists during the second segment, which will be the exchange with our participation. My name is Mary Kraft. I'm Head of Institutional Relations and Summit at the ITF, and it's my great pleasure to facilitate this discussion today. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn straight away to our Secretary General, Young-tae Kim, for some opening remarks by video, and then we'll turn to Baroness Fair to get us started.
Your Excellencies, Baroness Fair, distinguished delegates representing the United Kingdom Presidency of the ITF, and esteemed attendees to this session. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's an honor and great pleasure to me to open this webinar, hosted jointly with the UK Presidency. The theme of today's event captures one of ITF's priorities that we share with the UK, the need to accelerate action on gender equality through making transport safer and inclusive for women and for all users. Why is it important for the ITF? Our research shows that safety and security is a fundamental factor in ensuring equal access to transport. As transport users and as transport workers, women and men are not equally affected as women face higher levels of violence. Reducing this gap is a matter of fairness, economic efficiency, equality of opportunity, and full participation in society. Surveys tell us that 8 out of 10 women have been the victims of some forms of harassment in public spaces. This includes transport and associated spaces like metro stations and bus stops. is a truly shocking figure. Safety concerns shape women's transport behavior across all transport modes more than men. Safety is the top priority for women and an essential condition for using public transport. Lack of safety or the perception of unsafe transport services and infrastructure can prevent women from walking, cycling, or using public transport, which are more sustainable means of transport. A fundamental change is needed to design transport system with women in mind. We need a consistent approach to incorporating a gender dimension into transport policies for users and improving the gender balance in the transport workforce. Narrowing the gender gap requires a collective effort, and the ITF is prepared to help facilitate the discussion on gender in transport across different stakeholder groups, such as our partners in government, international organizations, academia, and the private sector. At the ITF, we also develop policy tools, such as our recent Gender Toolkit for Transport Policies, to help policymakers incorporate gender dimension in transport planning and policymaking. Esteemed attendees, I look forward to continued engagement with all ITF stakeholders to work together to keep all transport users safe, secure, and healthy. It is a top priority for us, and I am sure that we will advance our work towards achieving this goal under the leadership of the UK Presidency. I wish you a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much to our Secretary General for those words. And now it is my pleasure to invite Baroness Fair, UK Minister for Aviation and Maritime, to provide some opening remarks. Baroness Fair, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And it was so lovely to have that introduction from the Secretary General, Young Tae Kim. I saw him recently in London, where we had some really good conversations about, obviously, the UK presidency of the ITF, and also, how we can continue to work together on many important matters, including the safety of women and girls on our transport system, and how we can make sure that the transport system works for them. You may be thinking, what on earth is the Minister for Aviation, Maritime and Security doing here? Well, I have been a minister in the UK government for 3.5 years, and all that time I have been in transport, and I was roads minister for 3 of those years. So I've done a lot across the transport brief, and I know that ensuring that it is as accessible as possible to absolutely everyone is really key to creating a good transport network wherever you are. Because look, we all know how important transport is. It can enrich, it can empower, it can give people the means to get to their jobs, their employment, to their education, to healthcare, and simply just to go out and see their family and friends. And sometimes for women particularly, they have slightly more complicated journeys because they might have caring responsibilities as well. And I think we do need to understand that, because transport users are not all exactly the same. They have different experiences and they do have different needs. And if we're really going to get inclusive transport working for everybody, we have to understand that, because we cannot have barriers where some types of people feel unwelcome, or they feel unsafe, or they feel that it's not for them somehow. But that is the case. It still means that, in so many areas, women and girls don't quite get the attention that they need in order to make the network run as smoothly as it can. And of course, that's got 2 elements to it. It's firstly, that's got to be understood by policymakers, people like me, people who direct what the policy is going to be. But then also by people like Anne, who works in the West Midlands. She's absolutely fantastic. And it's up to them then to put it into place operationally down on the streets where it really makes a difference to the travelling public. So we know that, for example, about 75% of women in London have reported feeling harassed or experienced violence even in public spaces and on transport infrastructure. That cannot continue. I mean, obviously there is an issue there for law enforcement, but we have to think about how we can get the transport network just to help to make matters easier for people as they travel around. And it's also, it's incredibly important that people do feel safe, but it has other impacts as well. With, for example, with the economy, we know that there is a large city in the UK that estimated that the impact of sexual harassment towards women cost their local economy £338 million. Now, if you added that up across the UK and then, goodness, added that up across the world, that's a huge loss in the economy. It's unnecessary. And I think that we can do better, because this is an economic issue. Of course, it's an environmental issue. We need to get people out of their cars and using lots of different types of transport. And it must be a moral issue. So my thanks to the ITF for putting together their gender analysis toolkit for transport. That's very, very helpful. In the UK, we are very much focused on, for example, improving our bus services, and we want to see more onboard CCTV on our buses. Crucially, it's all about data as well, making sure that timetables are available, real-time data is available, and predictions on when your next bus is going to arrive. And we've got a huge focus, and I know that Dame Sarah helps us with this enormously. Dame Sarah is on the board of Department for Transport, around active travel. How do we get people back, cycling if they would like to, wheeling if they want to use scooters or e-scooters, and of course, the age-old favourite, walking. So we do have a lot to do, and I know that I'm really looking forward to the contributions of other panel members and the questions from the audience. But for now, I will hand back to Mary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baroness Fair, for getting us started, and your dedication to this topic is very much appreciated, and provides a grounding, I think, in terms of the high-level policy importance of this for women. So very grateful for your being with us today. Before we get started with our panel discussion, and I will start that off by introducing our experts that are joining us today, just a very few words to set the scene for the discussion, complementing what our Secretary General has said, and also the words of Baroness Fair. I mean, I think it's clear that, I think we all agree with this, that women are often constrained, let's say, by transport policies that do not take into consideration the differentiation that exists between their needs as travelers, so roughly 50% of the traveling constituency, and the needs of men for travel, both in urban areas and in peri-urban and rural areas as well. Our research here at ITF, and I would just like to say that we do a lot of collaborative exploration of the topic related to gender with both the World Bank, and Carla has been such a great partner with us on that, along with UITP and Mohammed himself, who is a very strong advocate for the better understanding and consideration of gender in transport policy. So we're our research definitely builds on that collaborative dialogue that we have with your two institutions in particular. The research shows that gender is one of the key socio-demographic variables that can influence travel behavior. And it is often the least understood. So the least considered, yes, but also the least understood. Yet transport systems are typically designed for male commuters and do not, as I said, take into consideration the need for women to travel in trip chains or circumferentially, so not linearly, for caring and social roles. Our research also shows that concerns around safety and security are persistent and influential factors affecting the way that women travel, affecting their mobility patterns, which thereby can limit access to employment opportunities, education, healthcare, other public services. So there are significant knock-on effects to not having women's needs for travel taken into consideration. In addition to that, and perhaps even more importantly, women, and in some countries this is up to 80% of women, have indicated that they feel exposed in some way or another to physical aggression or verbal aggression, sexual harassment, or other forms of unwelcome behavior as they travel throughout the transport system. Now, this, of course, is not only morally reprehensible in and of itself, but it also causes economic and social harm, and there are consequences to that. It also reinforces forms of inequality, as we have just pointed out. So the issue goes well beyond just the immediate denigration of women's ability to work to travel throughout the system, but also to equality and inequality in the system. Now, what can transport policymakers do? And we are trying here at ITF, along with our partner organizations, to better understand how policies can influence individual travel behavior and reveal preferences and attitudes, provide insights into existing travel patterns, and improve transport policy. I think we all agree now, this is a general, recognition that we need better data to develop evidence-based policies and tools to implement measures and initiatives with gender in mind. Awareness and acknowledgement, however, are not enough. And we need to go beyond these in order to collect better data, to create and implement better policies. And for this, resources have to be available. And this requires better cooperation and coordination of all transport stakeholders. That includes governments, business, academia, civil society, and all levels of authority, from local, regional, national, right on up to international organizations such as the ITF. And we, through our Secretary General and the priorities that he has placed on gender, are trying to do our part in this. So with that as sort of a backdrop, it's my immense pleasure to introduce our distinguished expert panelists that are going to help us to navigate the questions that are very much a part of this. Let me start first with Baroness Fair. Baroness Fair was appointed as Parliamentary Undersecretary of State of the Department of Transport in April 2019, and she continues in that role. She has spent 4 years as the Executive Director of the Girls' Schools Association, including 6 months as the General Secretary of the Independent Schools Council. And prior to that, she was the CEO of Big White Wall, which is an online mental health service, as well as being Finance Director at Recruit Media, which is a digital recruitment agency. So Baroness Fair, a very distinguished career. Your perspectives today, I'm sure, draw on the vast knowledge that you've accumulated over those different roles. And we're delighted, as I've said before, to have you with us today. Next, I'd like to introduce Anne Shaw. Anne is Executive Director of Transport for West Midlands, and in July of 2021 was appointed by the UK government as one of 2 Violence Against Women and Girls transport champions. So we really look forward to Anne's perspectives from the question of violence against women and girls. Anne, welcome to you. We're delighted to have you with us today. Dame Sarah Story, who joins us also today on the panel, has worked as a policy advocate for British cycling, with a particular focus on promoting road safety and access to cycling as transport for women and those with disabilities. Dame Sarah is also non-executive board member of the Department for Transport and provides the department with strategic advice, support, and challenge. And so, Sarah, welcome to you. We're delighted also to have you with us and look forward to your perspectives today. Mohammed Metzgani, who is Secretary General of the International Association of Public Transport, UITP. Many of you are familiar with UITP, has been Secretary General of UITP since January of 2018. He is an advocate for urban mobility worldwide, has taken UITP well beyond just collective transport and really brought UITP to the perspective of an intermodal travel system for cities. He is a strong advocate of gender and has really engaged his organization on this topic in very, very meaningful ways. He has more than 30 years of experience, and I've had the pleasure to know Mohammed for most of those. So Mohammed, it's great, of course, as always, to have you with us today. The UITP has collaboratively with the World Bank also published a global report this year concerned with gender considerations and public transport policy. And so we look forward to your joint reflections on how that work is bringing better awareness to the sector and beyond in terms of the topics we're talking about today. And last, but very much not least, Carla Gonzalez Caraval is transport manager for the World Bank and is leading the gender task force for the bank's transport global practice, which works to operationalize gender considerations in the wider transport arena. Carla, we've had the pleasure of working with you for a long time as well, and you have certainly, your voice has certainly resonated throughout the sector and helped to bring gender to the top of the agenda, both at national level, but also at international level as well. Ladies and gentlemen, those are our distinguished experts today, and we really look forward to their voices and helping us to explore and better discern how we can improve on the questions that are being asked today. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Let's open the panel discussion, and we have about now close to 45 minutes to hear from our panelists. Everyone, please take note of particular questions you have for the panelists, because we do want to open it up to you to share your questions and considerations with them. I'd like to start, if you would agree, Baroness Fair, with yourself. With the following sort of general question, maybe you'd get us started with this. As we've said, typically women and people that have caregiving responsibilities, so it's not always women, but I think we all agree that very often it is women that have these caregiving roles. This carries with it, for these women, more complex travel patterns due to the need to complete multiple tasking within one journey. So as I think we said earlier, it's not very often not linear journeys, but more non-linear, let's say, with multiple stops and trip chaining along the way. How can we, and in particular, you have this visibility in your role as minister in the UK, how can we address the challenges that are related to this non-linear trip chaining characterized travel pattern that women carry? And this is, of course, in urban areas, but also in rural and peripheral areas as well. And naturally, these rural and peripheral areas are where public transport or collective transport is less frequent and available.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for introducing me to the phrase trip chaining. I hadn't heard it before. It's not something we use in the UK, but I'm looking at Anne and I think we should use it. I think we've got a new phrase in our armory to describe how people use different modes to travel. And I think, you know, it is really important. And I take on board the comment that often, you know, women may have different travel patterns and also different needs that they have to fulfill by traveling. I mean, one of the things that we are focusing on very significantly in the UK, and I mentioned it in my opening remarks, and I think it's worth repeating, is data. There are so many different ways of accessing that data now. And for example, one of the things we did in the UK is that the government supported the bus open data service, which, and it's a requirement for operators to send their data to this service, which then makes that data available to whichever app or whoever wants to use it. And that data includes timetables, real-time information. We're trying to get as many fares on there as possible, because obviously, if you have the data, you can plan the way that you're going to use for this, in this circumstance, the buses. You also know how much it's going to cost you. Obviously, in many of our urban areas, you can often use 2 different bus services for one price, or more actually. So we have time limited fares. And I think that, you know, we've got to recognise that women often have less access to a car, and so they don't necessarily have the choice of using other things. And so the second thing that I think is really important as well is integration and access to different modes. So you may well have the data, but the next thing is that if you do have to change from one mode to the other, are they integrated? Do you have reduced friction between the 2 different modes? Are you comfortable waiting if you do have to wait? That is really important. But I think you also touched on something that I'm sure everyone will agree is very difficult in transport, and that is the rural areas, because your population density is such that you know, bus routes are uneconomic. Walking or cycling very, very long distances is often impossible, and depending on what you're doing a journey for, you may not be able to get your kids on a bike. And so it is very difficult, and we've got a future of transport rural strategy that we're preparing at the moment, which is specifically looking at those rural challenges, and will of course address the issue around gender and different travel needs. But what we have invested in, because as a minister, sometimes it's quite good to have a little bit of money. I have invested £20 million in something called demand responsive transport, which uses much smaller vehicles, which can be called using an app on your phone, or you can use a traditional landline phone. And they don't have set schedules or set timetables, and they will come and pick people up in a sort of a demand-based fashion, and it links people together. So there is no single silver bullet for this one, but I think it's just important to listen to lots of ideas, try different things out. You know, the DRT, the demand responsive transport, is a pilot. It may work, it may not work, but you know what? We will learn something from it. So yeah, that's very much what we're doing in the UK.
Thanks very much, Baroness Fair. And you point to the question of resources. I mean, I think, first of all, to data and the need for data, and particularly disaggregated data that will be able to track and monitor gender-specific travel patterns. That, of course, is resource intensive. So you've pointed to the fact that that does require some investment. And I think that investment is coming in at a national level from your ministry. Is very heartening. And so I think it will be certainly interesting for the community to see how that investment actually is contributing to the betterment of demand responsive transport, because of course this is interesting for women as well. So thanks very, very much for that. And I think you mentioned the non-availability or frequency, and also the often not economic results coming out of rural and peripheral bus routes. So maybe, Mohammed, when you come in, you could address that as well. I know this is a challenge that you've been facing with your operator membership as well, how to handle that particular point. Okay, so thank you very much, Baroness Fair, for that. Now I'd like to turn to Anne Shaw. Anne, you are focusing in your work very much on making communities aware, raising awareness and understanding of violence against women and girls, and initiatives and measures that can go to reducing that violence, which is persistent and in many, many, many countries. You know, transport, collective transport hubs where there is a coming together of several different modes of transport. These spaces, the infrastructure itself, but also detailed equipment such as lighting, can create an environment that leads to apprehension or fear even for women to use those modes of transport, which often are the kinds of active modes that we're talking about today, and also collective public transport, which is encouraged right across countries for a variety of sustainability reasons. So if we've got women apprehensive or fearful of using those spaces, what do we need to do to improve the conditions there so that that fear is reduced? And this can be in terms of planning, but also in understanding the impact of the environment around these transport hubs that is not conducive to women's travel.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The design of these spaces and how we integrate all the transport modes is probably where people concentrate most. And I think from some of the research that we've done on this violence against women and girls agenda for our UK government, we've been looking at what are the issues with that as well. Some of the points that have been raised is that actually the design is mainly designed by men for men and doesn't necessarily take into consideration the different kinds of things that women and girls may need when they're travelling on the public transport system as well. And then also safety in that design is something that we really need to think about to make sure that people can feel comfortable as part of that. Of course, we always take opportunity as well. So any transport interchange is actually really part of city fabric. So the opportunities that we get, particularly as here in the West Midlands, as we've been regenerating large numbers of areas, is that we really think about how transport infrastructure nestles into the wider city fabric as well. So they become places that are not just for catching transport, they can become places where you can do other things. So just my example here in Birmingham is New Street Station, huge station, large numbers of passengers, but actually it's a fantastic space to come as well if you want to do shopping or other things and meet people there as well. So it's really fitting into that fabric. But some of the really key things that we need to introduce into those transport hubs is, safety and security is absolutely paramount. So CCTV and other ways of monitoring those stations and making sure that we're looking for the kinds of behaviours as well that we would see where it's inappropriate, where women are made to feel unsafe and unwelcome in those places as well. So that all also comes down to any frontline staff that are working in those locations. We want them to be well trained. We want them also to be well respected. So the women who are in those areas know that if they went to somebody in a uniform, that they would have somebody who was responsible and would be there to look after them should there be something wrong with that as well. We also want to make sure that we are bringing into the people who are doing that design. We want to make sure that the workforce, women who are working in transport, are also helping to design those transport spaces as well, so that we're removing some of the gender bias in design as well, and we're making those spaces not just safe for women and girls, but safe for everybody as well. That's really important. So inviting spaces, welcoming spaces, safe spaces with the right staff, the right infrastructure that can monitor those staff, so CCTV, and really quality design that embeds our transport hubs into the fabric of our cities.
Thank you very much. And I like very much the way you characterize the embedding or nestling of these transport hubs, where these different modes come together, where there's an activity base around them, into a larger environment that can be more welcoming, more inviting, and therefore reassuring for women. But not just women, as you point out at the end, it's really for all travelers as well. And again, this comes back to this idea of, yes, it's about the specificity of women's travel, but the benefits that we derive from measures to enhance the welcome to these spaces can be derived by the wider community of travelers as well. And there's good economic argument in that. So thanks very much for that, Anne. And I think one of the things that pops into my mind as I'm listening to you, I think maybe we could come back to, and I know Mohammed, you might have some things to say about this as well, is the notion of perception versus reality, and that we need to address the perception side as well as the reality of the potential danger or menace in a particular area. Okay, so that's great. Thanks so much, Anne, for that. Some very important points there. I'd like to turn to Carla now. Carla, we're talking today specifically, well, at least some focus on active travel modes, so walking, cycling, and then the juxtaposition with collective transport and public transport. But in fact, one of the, I think, growth areas for transport policy over the last number of years has been, how can we look at these challenges in a more systemic way, in a more holistic way, where we are evaluating the impacts of, let's say, perception or real unsafe areas on travel behavior, and therefore on modal split, etc. And so I'm wondering how we can better understand the need for safer transport for women, so a feeling of more security, in a more systemic, holistic way.
Thank you, Mary, and it's a great pleasure for the World Bank to be part of this panel. Just let me go straight into the question. I think that we are understanding that the role of transport as the one that really shapes the quality of life at cities, it's changing from being very traditional infrastructure provider only for connecting A to B, to become a real generator of mobility, a real essential into how people moves and how people really use the city and the way that people goes to places, including, of course, their jobs. And in that sense, we need to understand, first of all, that mobility is not gender neutral. We have been saying that since we have started this panel, but for many years as well. Men and women, we travel, we go places in a different way. And the sector has not been understanding this in the way that it has shaped the way that we need to use the sector for. So instead of going very quickly into understanding that what is the role of the users of the system, the sector has been really very keen on understanding more technology and infrastructure per se. And that is, of course, essential, it's as important, but without paying attention to who the users are and what do they want, we are really missing a big part of the story under mobility. And let me just explain this through two examples. The first one is what the jobs survey under ILO has said many times, or at least since 2017, when they insisted on the fact that when asking women, which is in developing countries, which is the #1 deterrent for you not to join the workforce, the answer was not lack of education nor lack of health, but it was lack of access to safe and affordable transport, side by side to lack of mobility of care or care services for their kids and significant ones when they are, let's say, in an ancient or when they are old. So mobility of care becomes at the center of what the users needs, either men or women. More men, fortunately, are now taking care of kids and of a lot of the mobility of care. And so we really want them to be part of this concept. But is the system conducive to provide this platform to men and women to go places and join either workforce or doing mobility of care as efficient? The answer is no, and it's on women particularly important based on harassment, precisely, lack of security and safety. It's one of the most important things that women are saying why we don't use public transportation in bigger numbers or don't feel safe. And the other point is when you ask women in India all the way to the Western Balkans, why are you using public transportation? The answer is because we have no other alternative to go places. And this means that when we think about women as users, as the main users of the public transportation, we have to see them as captive users, not so much as the green travelers that we want them to be. And so even though we know that women like to walk more, hopefully cycling more as the cycling goes up, as a transport, as an active mobility. Hopefully, I'm sure that we are seeing cases, but not yet there. More men than women go cycling, but maybe Sarah can explain that further. But what we are seeing is that at the end of the day, women are not really using public transportation nor active mobility because they want to, but because they have no other alternative. Meaning that when you ask women in some countries, Serbia is one example, if you have the chance to buy a car, would you jump out of the public transportation? And the answer is, of course, we will do that, which means that there is a big nexus between decarbonization and electric mobility and precisely the gender agenda. Let me stop here. I'm sure that we can discuss that in detail further.
No, thank you very much. I think that's actually a really important point, that it's not about necessarily user choice. It's about the obligation, as you say, and the captive ridership of women on public transport that is susceptible to move to other modes if the conditions change. So I think that's a great point, Carla, and I think it's something of a correction, I think, in what might be perceived as more green choice, as you say. So thanks very much for that. Let's move with that to Mohammed Mitskani, Secretary General of UITP. Mohammed, there's a lot out there now that have a number of different points that I think the experience of UITP and the dialogue that you all are having with your authority members and your operator members is focusing on. So just kind of a broad question maybe for you, and then you can pick up and address what you've heard as well, if you would. But among your membership, what can public transport authorities and operators do to emphasize a more gender neutral, if you will? When we say gender neutral, it's really a gender inclusive transit or public transport system that, in its attempt to be inclusive, really does address the differentiation in travel behavior between women and men. And if you could kind of talk a little bit about how the juxtaposition with walking and cycling as sort of last mile modes really fits into this scenario as well. Over to you.
Thanks, Mary, and really, it's very interesting and informative to hear all the contributions so far. Very, very important elements were mentioned, and it's I like very much how this discussion is taking place. So look, I think before we even talk about how to make public transport gender neutral and safer for women, I think we need to make sure public transport is available for everyone. And the problem is that in many cities, many countries don't have organized public transport systems, and which prevents women to travel, to go to work, to study, to visit relatives, etc. So I would say first, let's maybe in Europe we are lucky because we have public transport almost everywhere, but the basic condition is that we need more public transport to ensure the mobility for all, of course, and the mobility of women in particular. And then I think it's important to recognize that when public transport exists, the majority of public transport travelers are women. In some cities, it's up to 70%. And these figures in itself, I would say, is a justification to make public transport more women-friendly. And I would say a public transport that is not defined for the success, safety, and benefit of all users cannot truly be considered successful. And it was also mentioned, and I would like to insist on that, one essential step in the way to have gender neutral public transport system is to collect data showing the differences in expectation and in use between women and men. So we need this gender disaggregated data. I know that we have been also mentioning this in the report that we jointly worked on with the World Bank. So this disaggregated data is a must, and it's not done enough in the planning of the infrastructure, planning of the service, etc. So it will help better define the public transport supply, the routes, the service, the schedules, to make sure we consider the specific expectations of women. For example, one key aspect in many cities is that it was mentioned also, but it's that the majority of women commute during the non-standard day or non-standard late night work hours. So with less frequent public transport services. So for this late night services, for example, transport agency, they could consider bus drop-offs at requested locations to increase the safety. Yeah? We see some doing that I have an example in the Netherlands, for example, where the bus driver, they divert from the route to allow the women to get close to their home. We also know that the lack of secure environments and poorly developed infrastructure create barriers for women using public transport. So to increase the usability of public transport for women, we need a better infrastructure design, and it needs to so in bus stations with the short walking distances between stations, for example, especially in areas which are less populated. We need the bus stops also located in places with high visibility and increased lighting. We need a more accessible infrastructure, of course. So in some cities we have seen they have women-only coaches in metros, in trains, for example. It has enhanced the safety. So I would not say this is something we need to do in every city, where it depends on the local context, of course, but it's a solution in some cities. And when we speak about the violence and the harassment towards women, I think public authority needs to allocate budget and human resources to implement and reinforce initiative against gender-based violence. I said public authorities. I didn't say public transport authorities. Why? I think these acts happen in public transport, but they can't be solved by public transport operators alone or public transport authorities alone. We need a collaboration there. I mean, public transport is hosting these acts, but it's not the origin of these acts. This is important. And also the victims often fail to report an offense because they are in a hurry or because it's not easy for them to report. So most sexual assaults in public transport are not reported. So therefore, it's key really to correct this and make it possible for the victims and witnesses to do it. And I would like, if I may, to mention one important aspect is if public transport is not women friendly enough, it's because only 20% of the people working in public transport are women. So we have 70% of those using public transport are women in some cities, but only 20% working in public transport are women. So we need more women in the sector, more women involved in designing the service, operating it, maintaining it, also working, driving public transport, managing public transport at all positions actually. And to achieve this, we must convey a positive image of public transport as an employer. We must enhance the brand, the employer's brand of public transport, maybe by highlighting the benefits of public transport, making people aware that they will work in an environmental friendly sector, highlighting social inclusion, the benefits in terms of road safety, and so the flexibility it offers as well. And it's also important to show that public transport takes into consideration the specific expectations of women as workers, as employees, in terms of working hours. And that also when we have recruitment panels in public transport organizations, that these recruitment panels are gender balanced. Huh? And we had experienced this in some of our members, they have experienced this. So, and to end, I mean, we are in a context of shortage of staff in public transport. This is a global trend. This is a global trend. Our members, they are all reporting this challenge they have. And so I see this as a great opportunity to have more women joining the sector and then to better serve those who are traveling on board public transport. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I mean, you've pointed to a wealth of really crux issues there, critical issues, I think that help elucidate the challenge that we're facing. I mean, you know, the spaces that in which, as Anne was saying, transport services and equipment are housed, are nestled, the need for higher visibility, enhanced lighting, etc. The need for collaboration between authorities and operators. Your point that it's not just the operators, it can't just fall on the shoulders of the operators, and often shouldn't fall exclusively on local authorities either. There needs to be a national framework, and I know UITP has been very effective in passing along that message. You need a national framework for this as well. Better reporting of incidents. This is endemic to many societies right across the world where women do not feel that they are in a position to safely report what is happening to them. That is related, of course, to a larger issue about the situation of women in society in many, many countries. Your point about women being, 20% of the labor force, and that the opportunities that the current dearth of workers in the transport sector may present to women to step forward and enter the workforce and transport. Earlier today, we had a session in the context of the COP, the OECD virtual platform, that was looking at youth and the need to help youth become more aware of the opportunities in the transport sector for employment. This is a big deal. And women and female young people as well. So some excellent, really critical points there. I'd like to come back to some of those during the discussion. But before that, let's turn now to Dame Sarah Story. Dame Sarah, you have a diverse past. You're a British Paralympian, and you're now non-executive director of UK DFT. You're a champion of active modes of transport, not only for women, but also for people with disabilities, perhaps older people that enter into that as well, since there's a high correlation between age and disability. Dame Sarah, how do you see the question of active mobility, women, and safety kind of coming together in a policy context, and certainly with your experience as a sportswoman and the role that you're playing at DFT, the perspectives that you are developing and have developed over the time, something we'd like to hear from you now about. So over to you, Dame Sarah.
Thank you, Mary. And I think one of the headlines has already been picked up on is that road safety is a significant barrier to people when it comes to deciding whether or not to choose an active mode. And that's also with regards to walking as well. So we talk about walking, wheeling, so that we can include people who are also utilising wheelchairs as well as scooters or other mobility aids. But whether or not it feels safe enough to cross a road is one of the biggest barriers to older people, those people with disabilities. And so often I receive correspondence in my role as Active Travel Commissioner in Greater Manchester and previously in South Yorkshire from people saying the time that the pedestrian crossing allows me to cross the road, or the length of time I have to wait in order for that green man to show, is so long. And I don't understand why the vehicles are prioritized over me, or when the weather is bad. I'm stood there for ages in the rain and I just can't get across the road quickly enough. And we've all seen that awful situation where there's somebody who shouldn't be trying to running because they feel that if they don't, then they may well be run over. And that's a horrible thing to receive correspondence about. And equally with when it comes to cycling, that the safe segregated space that we need so that people who are riding bikes are segregated not just from vehicle traffic, but also from pedestrian traffic, and making sure that we create those active travel lanes and reallocate that road space so it's not always about vehicle movements. And especially important in towns and cities where the vast majority of the movements of people within there will be relatively short journeys. The main reason for vehicles is probably for deliveries or for public transport. And so those sorts of journeys in towns and cities, personal journeys in private vehicles, are the most unhelpful. They contribute the most to environmental issues such as air quality, and we know that even with the advent of e-vehicles, the emissions from brakes and tires are likely to be just as damaging to health as the emissions from the tailpipe. So there's a number of things to consider, and that obviously contributes to supporting the decarbonisation agenda and the improvement of air quality. But safety, 66% of women state that doesn't feel safe enough to ride a bike, and that's been a very sort of standard statistic for a very long time. The others aren't really sure whether it's safe enough to ride a bike, so you couldn't say a third are happy, because they still feel that people drive too closely to them, they drive too fast past them. And interestingly, here in the UK, we updated the wording of our highway code to showcase the hierarchy of road users that is probably better understood in some of European countries, where you have the pedestrian at the top and the cyclist, the horse rider, and then the vehicles need to take the most responsibility for the safety of everybody else in that space. And I think it's been really helpful to change the discussion point around things like the passing distances of people on bikes, because we can't wave a wand and create segregated space overnight. It's going to be a journey that we have to move through over time to create those segregated bike lanes. And if we turn to the Netherlands and look at the journey they've been on since the 1970s, we often point to that country as being a place where is the utopia of cycling, but it didn't happen overnight, and we still need that driver behaviour and those interactions between road users to be respectful, and for people to understand that a person on a bike has absolutely no protection around them, unlike the very many bells and whistles that we'll find on vehicles, such as airbags and the bars that are built into the structure of that vehicle. So it's really important that the behaviour of road users, the drivers, is tackled. And I think in some situations people want to address how we enforce the laws of the road so that people feel as though they have that protection from the people who are in the power. Third-party reporting is something that happens certainly in the UK. I don't know if it happens in other countries, whereby cyclists have started to wear cameras and report the incidents to the police forces for them to take action separately, and that has differing results and can be quite powerful, because if anybody could be a camera, then it could potentially be an opportunity to create some kind of new policy that enables us to enforce the rules of the road successfully. So I think it's that feeling of safety, and it's very important, as you say, to tackle the perception versus the real threat. And cycling remains one of the most safe ways to travel around. So it very much is around the perception of whether or not it is safe. That is one of the biggest barriers, because those people that like me that go out on the road most days, we know that there are issues, and being close past is absolutely horrific and very, very frightening. But one of the biggest things that we see from the data is that it's just as dangerous to potentially be stood on the footway. So making sure that vehicles aren't mounting the footway, and making sure that they are staying in that space at the right speed, and all of those things help add to the feeling that it is going to be safe enough for me to go out there. Because if people don't feel safe, they will be the ones that are doing the vehicle journeys. They're the ones that won't be potentially walking to the public transport interchange to take the public transport journey. And then, of course, a third of UK households don't have access to a vehicle. So in that circumstance, for some people, they're very much trapped inside the four walls of their house, which is not good from a health perspective either.
Sarah, thank you so much for that. And if you wouldn't mind, and I know you are going to have to leave us, unfortunately, but I know you have a commitment at just at the hour, and I know Carla Gonzalez Caraval, Carla, you do as well. But before you go, Sarah, I do want to come back to you because on one last point, you were talking about the safety, or let's say the threat, real or perceived, of riding a bicycle, and that women, you say 60% of women don't feel safe to ride a bike, and that a part of that may be perception.
Confidence.
It's actually,
well.
right?
Mm.
So my question is, what do we do about that? Because what we're experiencing now, not only with cycling, but other forms of what we might call active mobility, which is also referred to as, let's say, micromobility. I know the UK has not yet fully legislated use of electric scooters, but in other parts, I know you've got trials going on and very interesting experiences that are taking place. But in other parts of the world and in many, many cities, micromobility is a part of the travel landscape in urban areas, but bicycles as well. Naturally, there's the code, as you point out, and respect or non-respect of the code on the part of private vehicle users, so drivers per se. Do you note as well, though, that among the cycling community, do you feel like there is strict adherence to the code as well, and that perhaps there is opportunity to increase the safety of cycling as the cyclists themselves respect the code as well? What is your view? It's a bit polemical what I've just said, but it's really because I think a lot of travelers are asking that question right now.
We talk about where the greatest threat of harm comes from and whether or not a behavior is a nuisance. So somebody who is perceived to have done something that's a nuisance but causes no harm to anybody else. And there's a great video that Peter Walker put together. He's a journalist in the UK about this exact point. Is it something that's just slightly frustrating, or is it genuinely dangerous behavior? And a vehicle that goes through a red light or mounts the footway is an incredibly dangerous thing. If somebody's riding on the footway, we often have to ask ourselves, is that because they don't feel safe enough riding in the road, in the vehicle lane? Is there a safe segregated space? And while we're still creating shared use space, that can become incredibly confusing. So we always try and make sure that we refer to where the greatest threat of harm is coming from, and make sure we tackle that greatest threat of harm first, and make sure that we're following up on the legislation for things like licensing and insurances, because if we can't get that right for vehicle traffic, we aren't going to be able to disseminate that down to any other forms of micromobility. And we just have to be very aware of what is slightly annoying and what is definitely very dangerous.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I do want to release you to your obligation, and in thanking you so much for being a part of our discussion today, and looking forward to hearing from you in the months to come. Sarah, thank you so much. And Carla, I'm sorry, I understand you're going to have to leave us as well. So with that, could I thank you so warmly for being with us again today?
Mari, thank you. Just to make one point on decarbonization,
Sure.
I know that it was one of the main questions. I think that I would like to leave the panel with a question as well, based on the experience of the women that we have here, and of course of Mohammed. And are we taking for granted the main users of public transportation, which are women? Because we are, in a way, in many of the developing countries, because they are captive users, then no one is really paying the right attention to what they need, and therefore the public transportation system really doesn't go better, doesn't do much. So the question would be more on, is it possible when we talk about decarbonization to keep thinking that public transportation is still there as an alternative, when in fact women, the moment that they can, and if the electric vehicles are going to be at some point, let's say, a part of this share connectivity, or even less costly, whether women are going to jump into this and then just leave the public transportation, and then what will be then the future of our cities vis-a-vis mass transit. So let me just leave you with that, and really thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry that I need to leave.
Carla, can we just ask you to stay while Mohammed responds to that, though?
Yes.
You've launched an absolutely excellent question, and I want to keep you captive while Mohammed responds to that.
Thank you. Thank you. No, very briefly, I think, Carla, I mean, what you said is right, and we have to pay attention to that women will not leave public transport when they have an alternative. So it means that we need to improve the image of public transport. We need to make it more competitive with other modes, and to make it more attractive, and in a way that it becomes not an imposed mode but a preferred mode of mobility. And that's why now it's, when I see all this investment in public transport all over the world, I'm very happy, because we see an increasing awareness on the importance of public transport. But it's not enough. We need also to make sure that the decision makers, the policy makers, those also who will design the public transport system, that they take this into consideration. They understand that women are captive now, and they have to transform them into, loyal travelers of public transport, travelers by choice, and not because they were imposed to take public transport. But thank you for mentioning this, because this is something also I want to use when talking to decision makers, when they design, when they implement public transport.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carla, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye. I'm wondering if we might just pick up on that a little bit, because I think when we're talking here about choice versus choice to travel, either on public transport or active mobility, et cetera, but for the moment, the question was on public transport and its link with decarbonization, and the obligation that women in many parts of the world have to use that because they don't have access to vehicles, access to cars. There is a real economic question in that, isn't there? I mean, because if women are captive on public transport or choosing to use public transport, they still constitute in many areas, such as you pointed out earlier, Mohammed, 70% of the traveling public. Now, why is it then that the business case to really pay more attention to the needs of women that can be expressed by more safe conditions to use collective transport, why is it that that is such a hard argument to make and to get delivery on? And maybe Bernice Veer, you could come in there as well as to how the national level has been supporting use of collective public transport as well. And Anne, if you have thoughts about that as well, that would be great. But Mohammed, first back to you on this business case.
I think the main issue comes from the fact that we have considered transport as for many years, for too long, as an engineering issue.
Yeah.
We have considered transport as a technical issue, that we were more focusing on operating, on making sure trains or buses are punctual, etc., without considering who is traveling on these trains and buses, without paying attention to the people dimension of public transport. So public transport is a people the service for people. So we are now moving from supply-led, I would say, sector to more demand-led sector, where we progressively are taking into consideration the expectations of the different travelers. When I started in UITP, it was 20 years ago, many public transport operators didn't have a marketing department.
Yeah.
Means a department who is looking after the needs and the expectations of the travelers. And now marketing departments are also, I mean, the heads of marketing are also sitting in the board of directors, etc. So they are taking much more importance. So I think this is a shift that it is now taking place in public transport by making it more people focused and taking more into consideration the expectations of the travelers. Unfortunately, in some situations where the public transport is not available enough, is not available yet, so the focus is more on building, on expanding the network, on providing the supply, and less on the quality of that supply, or on making it more user friendly. And it's our role also at UITP to try to increase the awareness about that, which is very key element for the success of decarbonization and to making a mobility more sustainable. Mm-hmm. And one word about the fact that women are maybe captive users in many cases, but it shows also that women have a more sustainable mobility behavior than men. Mm-hmm. And so we need really to build on that. And as I said earlier, to make sure they choose public transport and they don't feel obliged to use public transport.
Right. Thank you, Mohammed. Baroness Fair, Anne, would either of you like to come in on that? Baroness Fair?
I think I would. I've been reflecting on the sort of the conversation this afternoon. I think it has been very interesting. You know, from a UK perspective, I suspect that in terms of the captive users of public transport, it may not be as gendered as one might first agree or might first think. I also think that actually there might be some quite significant localized differences. In certain areas, you would find a much greater gender skew in the sort of captive users of public transport. But in general, we don't see our public transport users as captive users at all, really. For us, it is about choice, it is about convenience, and it is about cost. And if we look at, you know, over the last few years that I've been a transport minister, we have pretty much issued new strategies for everything when it comes to public transport. We've got a new bus strategy, a new cycling and walking strategy. We've got, you know, lots of train reforms going through. And in all of the things that we've done there, it has been with the starting from the passenger. Everything always starts from the passenger. It's not about, oh, I want to deliver that service. Well, I don't really care about that. Are you going to take anybody with you? And are they going to have fun? And would they choose to use it? So, you know, I suppose we're lucky in that regard, in that we've sort of reached a stage where, you know, certainly in London, you wouldn't choose to drive. Why would you? It just would matter. It would take longer and it would be less convenient, probably more costly. So, and we've been able to invest, you know, quite a lot of money in our urban centres. I go back to what I was asked at the beginning. You know, the urban centres have had getting about £5.7 billion over 5 years. The problem is how do we fix the rural areas and some of the suburban areas? And that, I think, is a challenge of our times. I'm particularly worried about sort of older women living on their own who may not have access to a car in those areas. I'm still thinking about how we're going to reach them. But I am content that, you know, our business cases, when we do our transport investments, you know, 5K's business model, very well established way of looking at it. And I'm content that we do make the right investments for the right outcomes.
Thank you very much, Baroness Fair. We have a question coming in from Christina Gestionate. And here it is. It's about transport hubs. And so perhaps panelists, if you would reflect a little bit about the transport hub question. How much importance do participants or do the panelists place on hubs of different modes of transport, and particularly in rural areas? So what kind of a role are these transport hubs where a variety of different modes are coming together play in your transport systems? And Anne, perhaps you could address that from a safety perspective in particular. Let's start with Anne, maybe on that.
Yeah, well, certainly in rural areas where particularly services are probably limited how do you make something that's a transport hub, whether it's a bus stop or a train station, more open and accessible to people who live in that local area as well? I don't see it as any different in terms of the infrastructure. It shouldn't really be any different to what you see in cities, other than it's maybe on a smaller scale. It should still have the same design considerations to keep it safe. It should still have the same levels of protection through, safe monitoring and so on as well. And certainly that's something that we would want to encourage as we sort of develop those rural hubs. They will have smaller numbers of people using them potentially, obviously, other than big cities. So it's definitely something that we need to play into that as well. And I think it's really, if we talk about the suburban areas, it's really important as well, because this is where the majority of people live who may be travelling into cities, and where are they catching those services as well. And in the UK, we do have some issues in some suburban areas with limited public transport access, maybe only one mode as opposed to multiple modes. So it's not just about the design, it's about the levels of service that we have as well. And Baroness Veer earlier mentioned demand responsive services. So this is our way, this is what we're experimenting with here in the West Midlands, on how we can actually meet those more those communities who live that little bit further away, are a little bit more remote to the main services that they might be travelling to through demand responsive services, because it gives them more choice. It also helps us in terms of operational costs as well, because we haven't got big, large buses running around on smaller streets, and we're able to meet a different kind of demand as well. And I think it goes back to the point that Mohammed made, is that we're looking more about the demand rather than the supply, and we're actually adjusting our transport services to meet those new demands, particularly post-COVID, because people are travelling very, very different as well. And of course, wanting to make sure that women continue to use public transport where it was their only choice and may no longer be their only choice. We want to make sure that those services are reliable, they're safe to use, and actually it's going to get them to where they want to get to in a timely way as well. And I think some of the stuff we're learning around demand responsive services here in the West Midlands to connect some of those more remote communities to some of those services are actually starting to show some really positive results.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Anne, for that. Baroness Veer, over to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick point here, actually, because I think this is a very interesting topic, and I've been thinking very much about, providing public transport with public funding. There are other ways of providing public transport, and one of the areas where I think that the private sector would be a very welcome addition would be when it comes to transport hubs, because I think what we were trying to say earlier is you need a sort of a certain number of people to make it feel safe, to make it feel busy. And so if you've got a transport hub which does more than just get people from A to B or provide them with a waiting space, it provides shops, it provides cafes, it might provide a daycare centre, all sorts of things could be in one place. Sometimes I look at our train stations in the UK and the upstairs is completely empty. What are they doing up there? They've got empty space out there. Why aren't we making these things more part of the community? And therefore they don't just become transport hubs, they become community hubs. And that could very much be supported by the private sector. And I think, in these constrained times, I think that'd be really, really welcome.
Thank you so much for that point. And there are a couple of comments actually from the participation that relate to that. So I'd like to come to those. But first, Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, this question about transport hubs and about also peripheral areas makes me think about the fact that there is also an institutional issue or an administrative issue, because often we are at the crossroads of different territories and also different authorities. And transport authorities, that we have a part of the central city, and the closer periphery to the city is managed by one transport authority, and then when we go to the rural area is another transport authority, and so it's the integration and interaction between those authorities that we need to find a solution for that. And often we don't progress because of that, and it's really a pity that at the end, the travelers or the citizens are victim of this lack of coordination between the different authorities. And that's why, when we define the territory covered by a transport authority, we need really to think about cover the catchment area of commuting, and to make sure that we come with an integrated authority that is covering the whole area, and not having different approaches according to the administration, the administrations which are covering the different areas. So I think this is very important. Also, the other aspect I wanted to mention is about the fact that, and I think you mentioned this in your introduction, Mary, is that in UITP, really we are trying, I would say, to redefine public transport. Really, to say public transport is not just station to station; it's door to door, and putting ourselves in the shoes of the travelers. The travelers, once they left home, they have already it's too late to attract them to make them take public transport. They had already decided. So the moment of choice, I would say, of truth is that before they make their choice. And so that's why it's important that we have this integrated offer with integrated information, integrated tariff system, and to make it easy for them to travel door to door, using bikes, using scooters, using public transport. So for me, everything which is not the individual use of car is public transport, and we need to organize ourselves in a way that we can provide the solution.
Mohammed, I mean, you've touched on a couple of things that are really important as we talk about women and how they use collective or public transport. And one of them is the point that you made about moving from a supply derived to a demand based service structure for public transport. So that's super important, because that's a shift in emphasis onto the user, and several panelists today have pointed to that. So that's the first thing. You also pointed to the need for real cooperative initiative between operators and authorities, and also authorities at different levels of government. And I think this is something, of course, that has been a theme, I think, in dialogue around collective transport for some time. Coming to the question, and I think Baroness Veer, you brought this up related to the role of the private sector and what private entities can do actually to improve the environment, if you will. These are my words, of course, but the environment around public transport, collective transport, and notably in transport hubs. And we have a question from Joe Chang from our participation that has come in. Are there types of business that, when co-located with public transport interchanges or hubs, improve safety the most? So are there ways that companies, private companies or entities, can work with public transport, the authorities, the operators, to enhance safety in these spaces? Would you like to come in and comment on that? And Anne, if you'd like to come in, please do as well.
Yeah, I think they can. But my question is whether they should.
Okay.
Because now we're getting down to, and I'm not one for micromanaging the private sector. The point is, I think that an interchange should be designed with safety at its heart anyway. And if obviously you get a greater number of people in there, a greater feeling of safety, a greater variety of different organizations in there, whether they be all sorts of shops and cafes or whatever, that is a good thing. But I'm not entirely sure that I would be in favor of trying to micromanage it, because even if it were empty, you should still make the interchange as safe as you possibly could.
Great. Anne, would you like to come in?
Just to add to that, I think some of the things that we're looking at, the public sector investing in public transport and public transport hubs. We're also working in partnership with other public sectors as well. So with the NHS, for example, we're looking at ways in which we can put diagnostic centres in some of our train stations. We've got a huge hospital here in Birmingham, the Queen Elizabeth, and right next to a fantastic station that we're just rebuilding, and we're looking and talking to them about, could there be somewhere in there where people can go and take blood samples and other things, or receive vaccines and so on. And that allows the NHS to sort of relieve some of the pressures that they've got within their own estate, and brings into productive use other things within our train station there as well. So it's not just about private sector investment. There's many community services that are provided by other parts of the public sector, that if we work together with transport infrastructure, places where people are going to be, and it's easier for them to get to sometimes than a hospital or a doctor's, because it's closer to where they are. It's on a transport, it's on a trip that they might be making to work or to somewhere else as well. It's just about providing those different kinds of services that helps to stimulate demand on a public transport line, and then it adds to those sort of sustainability outcomes, because we're able to encourage people to travel in a different way as well.
Excellent, thanks so much. There are two additional questions that have come in, but we are coming to the end of our time. One is related to CCTV cameras and how effective they are in preventing incidents of violence toward women. I don't know, Anne, if you want to come in on that, or Baroness Vera, Mohammed, just a quick response to that, because we will need to move onward, but do you have?
Yeah, so that they can be very, very effective. They need to be managed in the right way. I've got quite a large safety team here in the West Midlands. So it's a partnership between West Midlands Police, British Transport Police and ourselves. And we've got quite a huge CCTV estate. We monitor it 24/7, but we do it in a way which is targeted through sort of data and intelligence that comes in about hotspots and so on. I think for CCTV to be really effective, people need to know that there is somebody at the other end watching what's going on. It's not just a camera for a camera's sake, and that's something that we do actively promote. So if you're out on the network and you're up to mischief, actually you know that you are being watched. There is somebody there. And through our Safer Travel Police deployment, they use the intelligence that comes in from our CCTV, and we have them deployed out on the network as well. And it's been really, really effective in reducing some of our crime rates on public transport. And then also they are targeting sort of violence against women and girls as well, through some of our initiatives through that. And the CCTV is an important part of a wider system that we've got for keeping public transport safe.
Marvelous. Thank you so much. Baroness Fair or Mohammed, do you want to come in on that same question? No? Okay, great. Super. We have 3 minutes left and 3 panelists with us. There's been an incredibly diverse and rich sharing of experience and ideas here about this interface between active mobility, women, transport hubs, transport behavior, more generally. I'm wondering if we might close our time together with some final thoughts from each of you. Just what, if you had one additional point, would you like to make to the participation today related to our theme? And I would just invite any of you to start us off. Would someone like to start us off?
Yes, I'd be very happy to.
Great, thanks.
I'd be very happy to. So I think I've just got one additional point. And at this point, I would, there are, I think it says 99 participants. I'm just very interested, how many of them are women? Because I agree with what Mohammed was saying earlier, and I have conversations around this with really brilliant groups within the transport sector about getting more women into transport. I absolutely agree. But we must also get more men involved in the conversation around the safety of women in transport. Otherwise, it is women talking to women. And I'm so grateful that Mohammed is with us today. Because unfortunately, we end up being a little bit of an echo chamber. And we have to try and make this interesting to everybody, because of course it's so important. And we must ensure that men recognise it too, because I think one of the questions that came up was about the design of rolling stock. Now, I'm fairly sure that most rolling stock designers will be men. And so the question is, we have to get them to care about designing rolling stock that is suitable, not only for for women, but also wheelchair users, but for everybody. It must be fully inclusive. And it's getting that inclusivity into people's minds, irrespective of their gender or their ability or indeed anything else. And I think that is my final remark.
And a very important remark as well. Thank you so much, Baroness Fair. And I can honestly say that, Mohammed, you have been, I think, from the community of men involved in transport, you have been a true champion of this issue and a very active and proactive champion of keeping this issue at the top of the policy agenda. Thank you, Baroness Fair, because that's so important, I think, to make note of that. And Mohammed, which one of you would like to come in next?
So I have got one point. I really agree with what Baroness Fair has just said as well. It's so important, and I'm trying here to make sure that we've got more women coming through our ranks and technically trained and so on as well. But the one thing that I wanted to mention as part of the work that I've done for the UK government on violence against women and girls is that this isn't a tick box exercise. This isn't something that's at the side of what we do and in a different department of the Department for Transport. This is embedded across all of the work that we do as well, so that we're thinking about it alongside other things all of the time, whether we're creating policy, whether we're designing new transport infrastructure, or whether we're planning services around and operating services and transport hubs and so on. It's something that we just embed and that we do quite naturally. And that's one of our recommendations to Baroness Fair and the DFT about how we do that.
Baroness Fair, would you like to come back? No, okay, great. Thank you so much, Anne, for that. Mohammed, could we finish with you?
Oh, thank you, and thank you for Baroness Fair for what you said about the involvement of men. I would like to say that there are many men in UITP that are really working on this, on making public transport more women friendly and more inclusive. But you're right to mention that we need more. We need also to make sure that they are convinced and they are not doing it only because they have to do it, because it's trendy or because they have to tick a box, so that's very important, and that's what we try to do also. We have this discussion in our board, we have this discussion in our committees to make sure that we integrate the expectations of women in any subject we discuss, and to make sure that to increase awareness about the importance of that. You said, Mary, if there is any topic that we could add or any aspect we could add. I think we haven't discussed, the fact that in many cities the infrastructure of public transport is very old infrastructure, and really we have a challenge. It's not just for the safety of women, but also for the accessibility of people with reduced mobility, for example. So, and and it takes, one of the challenge we have in public transport, it takes so long to change things. It takes long between the decision and the implementation of a change of a new system. It takes so long, and this is the challenge we have: how to shorten the delivery time. I would say that's really a problem. And so and one aspect which is linked to that is also the funding of all this investment, which is an important aspect. And to conclude, I would like to say, when it's good for women, it's good for everyone. So really, we don't have to do it just for women. If we do it for everyone, and of course women will benefit from it, and that's excellent. But we need to increase the awareness of the decision makers that they are doing for everyone, and everyone will benefit from the improvements that will bring for women. And thanks.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I think those are wonderful words to end by. I'd just like to come to your earlier point about the length of time. I mean, we're talking about a very long time for planning and financing enhancements to the system, and we know this. particularly for infrastructure, but also for financing of rolling stock, et cetera. And there's a question that did come in from the floor. We don't have time to explore it right now, but I leave everyone with it. And it is from Priya Wells, who addresses this question of women's safety. I mean, is it mostly a question of structure, or is it more an operational question? And I think the tackling of the challenges, either structure infrastructurally and operationally, that's a good way to sort of frame the set of initiatives that could take place to really make travel in the system more safe and secure for women, and thereby for all travelers in the system. What a rich and amazingly diverse discussion today. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, notably those that are with us at this time. Baroness Veer, for your support and for the engagement of your team, our colleagues at UK DFT in making this collaborative session possible. I'd like to give a shout out in particular to Dan Cattell as well, who really worked very much hand in hand with the ITF team to make this happen, and for your perspectives and sharing particularly points related to ridding the transport system of violence against women and girls, and the work that you're doing in West Midlands. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and perspectives today. Mohammed, as always, for being with us and for really being the voice of collective transport and public transport on this particular issue. Also for being a man and being a part of it as well. Thank you to you all. We're so grateful at ITF. And it is now my pleasure to close our session today, but to say that it by far will not be the last. And we really look forward to continuing the dialogue and the conversation on all matter of issues related to gender and transport policy with you all. Thank you so much. Have a safe and wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.